Welcome to the new and improved ConfigureITDone Podcast. The ConfigureITDone Podcast is now a place where we interview senior thought leaders in the SAP space across Australia and New Zealand, and the aim is to tap into their knowledge so we can pass on their insights to the listening SAP community. Please subscribe to the podcast and like, share and comment across Castos, YouTube, Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
This podcast is in partnership with the Black Dog Institute, who aim to create a mentally healthier world for everyone. If you wish to donate to the cause, please click the link below.
Thank you for coming on. This is my colleague, Chris Reed, and we've just been talking about sport. And Chris, I know you were a keen footballer. Who did you draw in the FFA Cup, by the way?
We drew against St. George's, who are an NPL team, which should be a tricky game. But yeah, we'll see if we can get through to the next round and hopefully draw Northbridge in the next round.
So I'll play for Northbridge. But yeah, all the best with that, Chris. And thank you for inviting on our guest today, Kyle Malligan. Now, Kyle, I'm sure you need no introduction to the majority of the market, but if you could go through a bit about your background, and that'd be brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, well, again, thanks, Chris and Jay, for having me. Just on sport, initially for my younger years, sort of dominated things. Cricket is what I played, from a very young age, and then through to, adulthood. Played almost 200 games in the Premier District Cricket competition here in Melbourne. In the state squad for a couple of years, and just not quite good enough. My claim to fame was when I was 19, I think. I was an associate scholar at the Australian Institute of Sport, and that year had Glenn McGrath and Ricky Ponting, Justin Langer, and I was an associate, so I was just sort of like a train on, if you like, for those guys. But I always like to think that they just went in a slightly separate career direction to me. So yeah, as from a working perspective, really lucky with how my sort of career started in financial services, and working for a company that I quickly went on to what they called a management development program, which was like their grad program, if you like. And from there went into a role that was predominantly looking at process improvement across the business. There was a site in each capital around the country, and it was a global company that ran in 35 countries. So from there, process improvement naturally sort of went into the bigger ticket way to affect process improvement through technology. So then I've set up what they called a strategy program office, and I ran that for a few years, and then the company was selected by our global parent to replace the core legacy system, which was an old AS400 green screen, function keys with SAP. And so that program went for about 3.5 years, and I led a big component of that program. But I always, reflect back on that. It was such a fantastic experience because it replaced, it changed everyone's job on the one day. And it had all of the components of, a large, transformation project, from the complexity, I suppose, of, implementing an ERP solution from something that was heavily customized previously, and then all of the aspects, I suppose, of a transformation going from A to B from a delivery side, but then the run side of things as well. And so after that program, I got asked to head up IT, and which I did for another 3 years from there. And I always thought that, I had to leave at some stage, even though it was a great company, that from there I went to one of the larger SAP installations in the country, and SAP and Cloud Services Manager there, which sort of then morphed into head of applications. And again, it was a consistent sort of experience that I had from my previous company, where it had a big component of change. And the company was going through significant change, but it also had a responsibility for the run environments of that system, and business critical systems needed to keep the lights on. So I always think of that as well. It educated me extremely well on the criticality of getting projects right, and implementing, something into production that is seamless really, and doesn't impact the running of the business. So, I did have instances of instability with that organisation for various large systems, and it's just not where you want to be, where the business can't deliver what they do for a living. So again, it was a really good project education for me. And whenever I'm talking to, I suppose, younger individuals coming through the ranks from projects or project management, I always think that it's a great experience to have in the in the BAU environment for production support, even though it's not the sexiest aspects of it, and incidents and tickets, but it does really ground you in the criticality of getting projects right, because the support individuals cop a hell of a lot of pressure, and if the systems are unstable. So from there, I got a bit itchy feet again for another transformation. So I was with that other company for 4 years, which was a fantastic experience. And so then I went and was technology program director for a large global finance transformation, which was looking at a multitude of finance systems and basically decommissioning those into a single, instance. It was their first real enterprise system. So it was an incredibly complex project, tough, I suppose, cultural environment as well, but incredibly rewarding one, where we did implement, their first ERP enterprise solution successfully. Again, it was so much complexity. It had 3 major vendors: Accenture, Capgemini, and Infosys, all as vendor partners for that program, all required to be delivering to a consistent, end-to-end solution. So that whole aspect of, having a real focus on the outcome and forming teams and relationships and developing trust, regardless of the commercial construct that might be in place, was, huge aspects of that program, which again was absolutely fantastic. And, one of the things that I learned from that was that no one, wants to do, a bad job, and if you can get the right environment, that, you can build some really good momentum. And then from there, I joined one of the larger SIs and was there for 4.5 years. For the majority of that time, was heading up the SAP practice. And the final probably 15, 16 months was in a transformation capability capacity, looking at growing the transformation business, but also developing team members as well, in regard to, I suppose, being comfortable with the complexity and ambiguity of large transformations, and trying to encourage the thinking of really looking forwards for risks and risk mitigation, and building that level of experience within the organisation, which again was fantastic. So sort of leads us to where I'm at today.
Brilliant. So it's fascinating to see your career and how you've kind of gone through the different stages. And I know today we're going to be speaking about kind of standardization versus customization on particular projects, but I just want to go back to the beginning of your career there and how you got into SAP. And obviously you mentioned it was a big program. I think you said it was 3.5 years, and it always fascinates me now because there's a lack of new talent coming through, and that coincides with these huge programs. Like, very rarely do you get a huge program anymore, and I think the SAP community is really struggling with getting new talent. And like you mentioned there, you was kind of finance background and then almost got pulled onto an SAP project. Have you got any kind of insights on what one of the larger SIs you worked on, what they did to get talent through, or encourage talent, or nurture talent through into the SAP community?
Yeah, I think, well, just on the, that program that I sort of cut my teeth on from an experience perspective, I just feel, incredibly lucky. I was with an organisation that had a incredible appetite to change and improve. I was just in the right place at the right spot, right spot at the right time. And the thing with these large transformation programs, and again, I think about myself, my own personal experience, that 3.5 years, I feel that I got 10 years worth of experience within that 3.5 years, just because of the magnitude of all of the aspects of, a large transformation of there was the organizational change component, but there was also, this aspect of customization of the solution, versus configuration. There was the elements of, an incredibly complex data migration. There was the integration components to other, legacy systems and how end-to-end functions needed to exist. So they were all incredibly complex from that program that, again, was interesting for me for the rest of my career to be very grounded in that. And even, things like, cutover management, in programs since that time, I've always been incredibly, I suppose, I've given an incredible amount of importance to start the things like, developing run sheets for cutovers very, very early, so that once you practice that all the way through, the life cycle of the program for new environments, etc., just as one smaller example. But when you get to production, that you've really got that down to a very fine art, that you're extremely confident that nothing's going to go wrong, and all the individuals that need to contribute to it are very well practiced, because again, production, needs to be priority 1, 2, and 3, of what the business do for a living. So how that grounds you back. I think from the perspective of your question then, how do you bring people through? And I think that from an SI perspective, for that, 4.5 years that I've just recently had, I think that one of the big things is around, I suppose, for individuals at my level anyway, is to be very present, I suppose, and hands-on in the sales process. Mm-hmm. And that, I think for me, is, thinking about the team, and particularly heading up, the SAP practice like I was, incredibly important to be able to provide the opportunity for individuals to be involved in large transformation programs. That probably is the first and foremost, that people can't develop, to their potential unless they've got the opportunity to do that. You know what I mean? I think that where I've seen a little bit of the market sort of going, just at the moment anyway, is that there's not that many large SAP transformations that are happening, like real true transformations, but there are a lot of technical migrations that are happening. So that whole thing of, the SAP and the end of the maintenance schedule for ECC6, and then pushing everyone to HANA. I think it's 2027 now. So customers, organizations needing to make that change, but not having the appetite to do a transformation along with that, as part of it, and just looking to make, that specific technical jump. So the technical migrations then necessitate more, I suppose, functional and technical skill competencies to be able to make sure that things are still functioning as they were, if you like, and then doing, your remediation testing and your performance testing, etc. So real nut and bolts type activities, which again isn't providing the opportunity for individuals, again, from a larger transformation perspective. So I think that, again, when those larger transformation opportunities are there in the marketplace, it's important to really try and put your best foot forward for winning those, because that then provides the vehicle or the vacuum for those individuals to come through. And again, I think about my own example, that the experience that you get out of just being involved in that and a large ecosystem of a transformation is incredibly valuable for people's careers.
Perfect. So let's focus now on some of those big projects that you've had, in particular around standard versus customization, which is a topic I know when we met before, this is something that you had some really good insights into. But I know SAP is trying to get everyone to go standard, but in reality, that's not really the way that customers want to go. But yeah, from your perspective, how do you deal with that? And what's your view on standard versus customization?
When Jay, you and I were talking about topics for this podcast, I suppose that was something that's I'm quite passionate about, because in every transformation that I've been involved in, the senior executive of the organization will have a strategic intent that they're going to adopt standard functionality. As soon as the program starts and the business subject matter experts get involved, literally from the first workshop, all that strategic intent goes out the window when the business SMEs come to a workshop and say, no, we can't do it like that. We're unique. We do it different. And everything sort of unravels from there. But it is an important topic, I think, because thinking about, the length of a transformation program, and the example that I had, I suppose, early in my career of 3.5 years, that probably won't happen again because, things being condensed and etc. But it was an extreme example, I suppose, that transformation programs are quite lengthy by their very nature, whether that's 12 months or 18 months or even 24 months at the extreme. A lot can happen, over that period of time. So on the point of customization, it's important that that strategic intent is then aligned to structurally how you're going to manage that intent all the way along, because the business SMEs, as that point that I raised, at that first design meeting, it all goes pear-shaped. You need to be thinking about the 1,000 conversations that happen every day of how you're going to manage that. So thinking about the life cycle of a transformation, and if you like, the path to production. So going from a program being endorsed and business case, that concept, I suppose, of what you're going to configure and versus what you're going to customize, because the thing is that there is good customization. So customization isn't something to be scared of, but it needs to be customization for things that are unique for that customer. So aspects that are real commodity, particularly around the finance area, I suppose, as an example, for standard functionality to be adopted, and the customization, for the configuration to be adopted, versus things that are, again, very differential for that customer in the marketplace, and for the customization to be done in a way that then upgrades can be adopted and all that sort of stuff is all fairly standard practice. So that sort of mindset of what needs to be adopted can almost be started, at the contract stage. So when the contract negotiation is happening, with an SI and locking down, master service agreement statements of work, there is an intent there that can be aligned within a contract very early on that then puts the SI on notice that you're looking for that organization to help you manage that intent. So, whether that's aspects that, again, just from a discussion, and then from a clause perspective in regard to governance, what you're expecting from the SI to bring to the table, from a perspective of keeping the amount of customization in check and the transparency of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So something from then, once you get through to starting the design session, something that I've seen and adopted quite successfully is having a design council or a design authority, and lots of big transformations that have them. But it is a mechanism that then floats up once you're starting the design sessions across the various aspects, whether it's finance, supply chain, warehouse management, transport management, whatever. When there is a customization component that floats up to the surface, to have a body that potentially meets every week, that I suppose the mandate to be checking the customization request and really looking at potentially pushing back on that quite hard to really challenge the functional consultant and their business SME counterpart to whether that's actually required. And then as another layer on that, whether it's the steering committee meeting on a monthly basis, to then have the steering committee as a final check. So it should be a bit of a rubber stamp if the weekly design authority is endorsing it. But again, it's putting the checks and balances in place to really make sure that, I suppose, from that governance perspective, that once you roll the movie forward to getting into system integration testing and user acceptance testing as an example, that there's not this big surprise of how heavily customized the system is. So again, I've been involved in programs where that has been a surprise, because as I sort of mentioned, as these 1,000 conversations happen every day in regard to the design, that things can get away from you all of a sudden with the best intent of different things. But you put that all together, and all of a sudden, the asset that is going to be implemented into production is something that's more customized than the organization would have liked. So in a very long-winded way, sorry, Jay and Chris, that I'm sort of looking to make, is that the start of that, if you like, that governance from the strategic intent really needs to start from day one. And the individuals that you put into different roles. So I suppose just from that aspect, thinking about the design authority, and again, an example that I've seen work very successfully is that you engage a part-time subject matter expert, whether it's someone from finance or someone from industry, depending on what the industry might be, that they then provide some content into that design authority to be checking the consultants, and the SME's recommendations along the way. So they can provide, if you like, a sounding board, but also a challenging aspect to the requirement for that customization. So that's thinking about structurally what you might put in place to keep that, that customization in check. And the other side of things, I suppose, is the relationship between the functional consultant and the business SME, which is incredibly important, because the functional consultant, coming from day one, will bring experience of SAP as an example, and their functional domain, and the business SME will bring the experience and expertise of the business.
Sure.
And so how do you get trust to be developed very quickly, that, again, from a perspective of standard functionality from the functional consultant, is something that the business SME is comfortable to be adopted. So there is, again, 1,000 conversations that happen per day, between those two individuals, but the relationship and trust that they develop over a period of time is absolutely crucial, that they're working in unison.
You touched on there, Kyle, regarding relationship building trust, and we find the best people that we work with and that we know have that ability to build really good relationships with customers, end users, and colleagues. I guess, do you have any examples of how you might have done this in the past?
Yeah, well, it's been interesting few years, hasn't it, with COVID and remote working, and that has meant that there has been a couple of programs that I've started in that time, which have started in more of a remote landscape, where both the business SME and the functional consultant might be in different states, but certainly working from home. And that creates a real challenge, because looking at that personal relationship side of things, which is important, with those two individuals, and and how they sort of move forward, is absolutely crucial. So it's coming up with things, to try and build that relationship. So something that, from a kickoff perspective of a program, again, I think really important, again, from that strategic intent of the program, and painting a picture of what's important for the business, but then also how you kick the program off from a perspective of senior leadership around transparency, and openness, and the ability to have tough conversations, because transformations by their very nature will have a high degree of ambiguity and discovery as part of it. Requests for proposals, as an example, that hit the market, sort of scratch the surface. That once you get into the bowels of a design, the complexity that might be there, and the way that you work through that, with between functional consultant and business counterpart, is extremely important. So I think part of it is, if you can be on site very early, and start to build some personal relationships. But it does need to be work from both sides, from a perspective of the functional consultants, and making sure that they're very aware that they have a responsibility to be building that relationship with the customer. And it's extremely important. And because sometimes, and I won't stereotype them too much, but there can be, I'm a functional expert, I know what I do, I can configure the system. But the other aspect of consulting skills and relationship building skills needs to be something that the senior leadership of the program really makes sure that the functional consultant is aware of their responsibility to build that bridge. That's their core skill set. And then on the flip side, the business side of things, I think, from a perspective of being open and transparent, sort of pull back from saying at all times, but as much as possible. Because the more that you can build that trust through openness, I think, the more, when there are problems and dilemmas and things that, I suppose, some of those tough decisions that need to be made, the more you can engage with them, as part of that, particularly early on, then builds, a bit of a runway, for the program and those relationships as you sort of move forward, because things don't get any easier. Once things do get to, into build phase, as an example. And I think that the other aspect that I have seen as well is using Agile has got a place in large transformation programs, but more, in my personal experience anyway, more from a concept perspective. So, I can't, again, from my own personal bias, I might be a little bit of a dinosaur, but the large waterfall projects where it does have some large stage gates moving through from design, move through build, move through system integration testing, user acceptance testing, and ultimately onto production, does give the opportunity for transparency of where you're at. And I think that that's very important, and again, to give the confidence as you're sort of moving through. But having a sprinkle of agile techniques in there, I think, is very, very useful. So as an example, through the build phase, to have, daily stand-ups, again, is a mechanism that you can continue to build that transparency and relationship between the functional SMEs, the functional consultants, and the business SMEs. But then also the opportunity to conduct showcases along the way in build, so that, something that you're doing there is with the showcase, ideally has the business SME presenting the solution to the other business counterparts and the senior executives, which then gives, another level of accountability and ownership on the business side as you sort of move through. But the function consultant really needs to help and coach the business SME to get them into that position, looking at, they've never been involved, let's say, in a large transformation, and then in the build phase. So, you've rolled the movie forward maybe 6, 7, 8 months, then you're looking for them to present the solution. So again, that there's an incumbency on the functional consultant to be working hand in glove with the businessman. But if you can get the businessman in that position by that stage, you're well on the way to something that's going to be successful. Again, when there's problems still, so you haven't even got into system integration testing or user acceptance testing, when other things begin to pop up. But if you can be building that trust, I think it's only going to hold you in good stead.
Yeah, I like that idea of the SME presenting to the business. Kind of gives them a accountability, and yeah, I really like that. That's good. I want to touch on your SI experience and working with customers. And on that same topic of standardized versus customization, and there's every intent to go standard at the start. And what happens when a customer does want a lot of customization, and you're there as the SI, and you've got the incentive to get it over the line. You've got that incentive, or even that incentive to win the project, for instance. But that you can see that they're going down the wrong route. Like how do you manage that from an SI perspective?
Look, I think from the start of, if you like, trying to win work, this stuff, as we know, is very competitive, and there's a lot of good skills, within the SI market. But I think that from my perspective, the best approach is always being honest. Again, a transformation program, sort of what I mentioned, by its very nature, they go for a long time. It's a long relationship. You really have to start that on the right foot. And if there are aspects of the solutioning side of things that you're very confident in, articulating them in a way that tries to educate the customer as early as possible, and take them on that journey with you, I think for me has always been the best approach. And I think, again, that customers and organizations, they're run by people, and predominantly people, they appreciate, honesty and openness. Now, it won't, talk a good game there, and it won't always win you the deal, because it could get down to, your price is, way out of the realms and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of aspects in their solution. But I think from a perspective of coming into the sales process and looking at it from almost an education process of the customer as well, is one approach. As you get into then the program itself, and if there is a strong desire for customization, and if there are the mechanisms, as I say, that you've tried to put in place for the education, of the program itself, but there can be other forces at play, as a result of it. Time could be one, that they need to get it in. There's big blackout periods that I've done with another customer. So you really were driven by a very hard timeline, which can compromise your decision making along the way. So there's some reality, there's commercial reality as well of how much they're looking to spend. So there's lots of aspects, but I think that setting up the governance side of things is very important. and the transparency of the governance of that as well. So that as you're moving along, you've got consistency, of the aspects of the program, good, bad, or indifferent, that again, it's building up that understanding, and so that there's no surprises later on. Because I also think that it's better to have the tougher discussions early, and take them on that journey, rather than a surprise of something that's too late.
Sure. Okay. And the last thing I want to focus on is the change management piece. Like there's a lot of customers at the minute that have heavily customized systems, and they'll be going through that pain of going to standard, which is a huge change. Any insights on that change management piece for organizations?
Yeah, well, it's one of the aspects when I sort of mentioned earlier on that one of the areas that I really have as a very high priority is around cutover management. And I suppose an element with that again is really crucial is around organizational change. And you would hear from a transformation perspective, it's the success of the transformation is all about the business adoption and organizational change. But from the nut and bolts of a transformation projects and the inner workings, it can be at times a little bit superficial. So the mechanics of a large transformation can really dominate the functional design, the milestones of the project, getting from A to B from an aspect of moving through those stage gates can really dominate the visibility, and organizational change can be left a little bit as just a smaller layer. So the concept, I suppose, that we're talking about of customization and configuration is a really crucial one for organizational change, because again, if the business were able to persuade by various mechanisms that it was a highly customized system, potentially then the business change would be smaller, because they're doing things that are a bit similar to what they were doing before, versus more that you can maintain standard has got the potential of being a larger organizational change impact for them. But again, from an asset perspective, what they'll be living for, again, the asset, the more standard you can keep it, the better the hygiene of that asset is going to be over a long period of time. So getting the organizational change individuals involved very early. So some programs that I've seen as well, look at, organizational change, getting involved, as a little tiny sprinkle, and then getting more, I suppose, active as part of the testing phases. I'm certainly of the mindset that the earlier you can get the organizational change guys involved, the better, because getting them involved in those, as an example, in those design authority meetings, gets them very much to roll the sleeves up of what the impact of that change is going to be, and those decision makings early on. And I think that and it can be hard as well, and I don't want to stereotype organizational change individuals either, but it can be hard to get OCM practitioners that have got more of a functional bent. So they're a bit, as an SAP perspective, as an example, they've got a bit more granular understanding of the functional components, and they're able to then look at that from perspective of the change that's going to be adopted, rather than communication or marketing or learning plans, etc. And again, that's doing them a little bit of that competency a bit of a disservice. But I think that if you can get individuals that, from an OCM perspective, that have got a little bit more of a functional bent, and they're able to then recognize the impact of that change into a business context early on, then you're going to go a long way, I suppose, from the ingredients needed for success. And I think that if you look at then a bit of a triangle relationship, and we sort of talked about earlier the functional consultants and the business SMEs and the importance of that relationship, if you can get the organizational change consultants embedded in that relationship as well, that as a three-pronged relationship attack for understanding what the change is, because the business SME is going to be absolutely crucial from a perspective of that business adoption, and then the encouragement back into their business, because they've already got that credibility, and how the organizational change individual can work with that individual, as an example, again, is an extremely important relationship to really invest in.
And just before we finish, Kyle, just kind of strip everything back, I guess, what would you say is your number one tip for, I guess, any aspiring SAP leader?
Look, it's just a great career path. You look at just the marketplace for SAP potential, organizations needing to change, as an example, is really there are so many opportunities in the marketplace itself, and the breadth of opportunities in different types of programs. So, as a SAP leader, you can be a bit industry agnostic. So whether it's, from mining or energy and utilities or finance, whatever, you can stretch. So the only other thing that I would say is that, and I do a little bit of coaching for a few individuals, and one of the core themes is for leaders in this space, just to be comfortable in the ambiguity. So every day you wake up and you're in a large transformation program, there'll be a problem. You won't know what that problem is yesterday, but it'll appear in the morning. And just to be comfortable with that, that's the nature of the job. You've got to group individuals together. You've got to structure around problems. You've got to negotiate in certain things. There's going to be ambiguity in regard to, things that come out in regard to testing. But just to be comfortable in that, I think is a key lesson. And if you can be, not stress about it, that, you'll get another 10 problems that'll happen today, and be comfortable that that's the nature of the job, to work through those things every day, that you're well on the way to becoming successful in this space.
Great advice, Carl. Love it. So look, I really appreciate you coming on today on the ConfigureITDone podcast. Absolutely fantastic insight, especially around customization. Before we let you go, is there anybody in the market that you've worked with in your career that you feel could provide some really good insights and you'd like to hear on the podcast?
There's a guy that one of the best application guys going around, I think, a guy by the name of David Crombie. And to that point of relationships and support and being comfortable in the ambiguity, absolutely fantastic. And the ability for him to build trust with individuals, and I suppose that whole thing of, building up a core of individuals that, would sort of do anything for you, and get involved in any problem. David has the ability to do that, and I think that's incredibly an incredibly great skill, and he was a fantastic leader. The other guy that's led a big program that I had a lot of respect for in a very tough environment, and he really knows the space very well, is a guy by the name of Pat Carrick. And Pat, a fantastic transformation leader, thinking about the business, but also with a really nice style for problems and working through, again, some really complex stuff. But those two guys, thanks, Jay, for putting me on the spot, sort of top of mind as individuals that, really, really good in this space.
Well, Chris will be reaching out to both for sure. But no, Carl, really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on, and I'm sure we'll speak soon.
Please like, share, comment and subscribe to the ConfigureITDone podcast.